On this day, in 1887, an event took place that would stand as an incredibly important and yet dark moment in the state's history. The execution of John Harrison and Ellen Thompson, the only woman sentenced to death in Queensland. The following is an exact transcript of part of an article published in the Brisbane Courier from the 14th of June 1887. Ellen Thompson and John Harrison's presumed guilt or innocence aside, the printed excerpt provides a very detailed and troubling insight into the act of execution in Queensland around the turn of the century and the morning's happenings inside the walls of Bogger Road Jail. The main jail building is a gloomy place at the best of times, with its lofty ceiling and its tiers of cells and the scanty light that steals in through a few long-barred windows and falls on iron-barred floors and iron-barred ratings, and on the cold stone floors and walls. It is gloomy and depressing even when the sunshine streams in of a summer's day, and when lights and birds wing boldly in through the unglazed windows and perch twittering on the iron-barred doors. But it was gloomier still upon this cloudy, blustering June morning when a little crowd gathered quietly on the ground floor and gazed silently at the ready scaffold on the tier above. For a tragedy was to be enacted within the gloomy building for a theatre, and the ominous-looking scaffold which crossed from side to side for a stage. A tragedy in which two fellow creatures would be the prime actors, and in which that mysterious thing which men call law would move as fate. And as one was to be a woman, a pitifully wicked woman. She crossed the yard from the little hospital building so quietly that one could hardly imagine she was walking to her death with a companion woman, a female warder it appeared, by her side, and a guard, for form's sake, behind. She walked with head bent a little and with hands clasped, in neat black garments, and with black bonnet thrust back a little from the drawn and haggard face, the face of a woman whose whole life has been passed in ceaseless toil. She had been brutal and violent, giving free vent to the bitterness of a despairing heart, shocking all who heard her with her blasphemies, and deafening the ear of mercy with unseemly cries. It was thought that there would have been a struggle on the gallows, but humanity prevailed at the last moment, and Ellen Thompson, murderess, died quietly and died game. Vile as the crime was, however necessary murder for murder may be, there is something that inspires esteem in the courage of the fellow mortal who fears to die, who longs to live, and who yet, brought to bay, can stand unflinchingly on the edge of eternity. "I'll soon be in a world where they won't tell lies about me," she observed, as she mounted the steps and disappeared up the inner stairway which leads to the condemned cell. When she appeared again, it was as an actor in an awful scene. One heard the priest's voice raised in prayer as 8 o'clock drew near. The gloom seemed to deepen, and the wind seemed to moan passionately as it came in through the bars. A sturdy warder, pale-faced, stepped out onto the scaffold, where there was a rustle. The prayer sounded louder, and in a moment the murderess stood on the trap, under the fatal rope. She was white as marble, and her teeth set hard, but she never faltered, and she looked such a poor little woman as she stood there waiting to die. Her hands were clasped still, and she held a little crucifix in the right one. She protested her innocence, she bade goodbye to her children, and then she prayed in Catholic fashion, not passionately, but as one who labours under a burning sense of wrong. She never moved from where she stood, but she swayed as one fainting when the noose was drawn about her neck. Her hand clasped convulsively over her crucifix, and it seemed as through her lips, under the death cap, moved silently in prayer. The strapping warder, who stood on the scaffold, held out his hands to steady her, but she braced up in the moment and did not fall. The executioner shook the rope to clear it. He and the warder stepped to the side corridors. At 8 precisely, the bolt was drawn. Her last thought was for her children. Thud. That was the only sound, for the wind had lulled and nobody seemed to breathe. Ellen Thompson fell straight as an arrow through the trap. her knees drew up spasmodically, and then Ellen Thompson's body dangled lifeless. The rope had cut into her neck, severing the jugular vein, and in a moment a patch of red appeared on the white cap and a crimson stream poured over the black dress, falling in a pool on the stone floor. It was pitiful before, but it was still more pitiful now, this execution. The woman who had been accompanying her across the yard washed the hands from the blood which stained them. A coffin was placed on the blanketed earth which two prisoners had brought in and heaped over the crimson pool. They lowered her tenderly, removing the rope from her neck, and the execution was over. It had not taken more than 15 minutes altogether. The executioner is a tall, grey-bearded, gentlemanly-looking man, whom no one would take for the holder of such a vile action. He is businesslike, and he never shrank, as the warders did, from the touch of the dead woman. But he felt annoyed when, in the interest of science, the cap was removed for Professor Blumenthal to measure the head. As an aside, and quite morbidly today, the 13th of June also marks the anniversary of the execution of Alexander Joseph Bradshaw, who was put to death inside the walls of Bogger Road Jail on the 13th of June 1910, 23 years to the day after John Harrison and Ellen Thompson. Unfortunately, Bradshaw received a similar fate to his predecessors, his head almost being torn from the body as a result of the hangman's noose, although an account of Bradshaw's crime will remain for another day.